Ladies and gentlemen, Ian Anderson. Ian, it's 20 years, and in all that 20 years, have you ever come to actually like show business?
Well, I don't think luckily, I haven't spent 20 years in show business. I've been fortunate enough to spend 20 years playing music in a different kind of a context. So I've never really been anything other than very much in the periphery of the show-busy end of rock and roll or pop music. So I don't have a lot to do with it. I stand very much as an outsider and sort of, you know, smile behind my hand at some of the more poppy groups who come and go over the years, and we just carry on doing whatever it is we do. And I've no idea what it is, or why people still like it. But,
so you don't have, like, gold records at home and stage costumes hanging up like, say, Elton John might have, something like that?
Nope, nothing like that. No, I don't keep photographs, gold albums, or anything around the house, because, I mean, if you do it for a living, or in my case, at least for half the time, I'm still playing, making records and doing concert tours, and it's great to have it as fun and exciting and coming back to it when you go out and do a 3-month tour again. And to be reminded in your day-to-day environment of what you do is not, you know, I think it detracts from the sort of the coming and going from that kind of life, being a rock and roller on the road and doing the stuff that I do back here, which is, as you pointed out, more in the fish farming context.
Which we'll talk about in just a moment, but staying with music for the second. Looking at photographs through 20 years' history of Jethro Tull, it struck me that you have always looked like a kind of student hippie who's pinched his dad's coat and his mum's wooden beads. You've never changed, really, have you?
Well, where are the wooden beads? I mean, goodness me, I loathe hippies. I mean, I didn't actually... We came up at a time that was a bit post-hippie. I mean, the dying sort of embers of the hippie era. And I personally just sort of loathe the hippie thing and all that it stood for. I mean, I've never even tried smoking marijuana yet, let alone any of the other stuff. So, I mean, I wasn't part of that drug and social culture that people associate with the hippies. I came a bit after that, you know. Not long after it, but, you know, definitely at the tail end. So, I mean, I never had anything to do with it. And it's... to be thought of as being some sort of aging hippie dinosaur rock band is an easy peg, you know, to hang Jethro Tull on, but it's not really quite the case. I think we've been a bit more serious musically than perhaps that.
But in this business, of course, image is important. What did Americans think of you all coming over there with the long hair, the beards, the caftans, that sort of thing?
I think they saw us as being terribly British, and in some ways perhaps we were, relative to the sort of American clones that Britain was turning out at the time, you know, particularly in the R&B field, which was very Americanized sort of R&B, whereas we did something that was, although it had a blues base, it was still something a bit more eclectic and a bit more sort of British or European in flavor. I mean, there were elements of Celtic folk music and classical music.
It wasn't just
you know,
rhythm and blues that you were doing,
no,
of course.
Only maybe in the first 6 or 8 months, you know,
Right.
when we're trying to, you know, get arrested in the London clubs. You know.
Before you did the rhythm and blues, I mean, way back before Jethro Tull was formed, 1963, you were called the Blades. What sort of music were you doing, and just how awful were you then in your first inception as a group?
Well, we were indeed so awful that we changed our name in those early days every week. Our agent in the office used to have to think of a different name for the group every week in order to try and get a return booking at the clubs, because no one wanted us back, you know. So every week we'd be somebody different, and we never knew, because he never told us what we were called that week. And we'd arrive in front of some famous London club and look down the billboard outside, and whichever group we'd never heard of before, we figured that must be us, and we'd go and introduce ourselves. Some poor club manager would say, "Wait a minute, you know, haven't I seen you before?" And I said, "No, we've never." "Oh, you don't mean my brother, do you? And that dreadful, you didn't book them, did you? They're awful." And eventually we got a residency at the Marquee Club when we'd sort of come of musical age, as it were, and then we had to stick with the name we had that week, which was indeed Jethro Tull.
You touched earlier on this fish farming in Skye. How much at home are you with it? I mean, I read of you periodically in the papers when somebody's up in arms about what you're doing up there for various reasons.
Not usually so much about what I'm doing. I'm not attacked nearly as much as other entities, or indeed the industry as a whole. I've got off fairly lightly, but we do have 7 operating sites now and a couple of factory premises in Inverness, and about 100 people being employed overall. And my little part of the fish farming industry is a meaningful part of what is a very meaningful whole. I mean, there's over 1,000 people directly employed in fish farming. It has brought permanent employment to many local people in areas where there were just no job prospects. I mean, let alone career prospects. And I like to think of fish farming as not just being a job. It's not just throwing feed at fish, but it's something that's a career opportunity. And we're all for having kids from the local schools go off and finish their education, get degrees at Stirling University, wherever they can, and come back to work, not just a job, but as a long-term career. Fish farming has got to be here to stay. It's got to learn, as indeed it is learning, to sit within the rules of conservation, ecology, and so on. And play
Are you
a
going to stay
meaningful
committed
long-term
to it?
part. I have to do. I mean, I've got a lot
Brilliant.
of personal involvement in it as well as a great emotional involvement.
Well, Ian, for the moment, thank you, and who knows, here's to the next 20 years of music. Ladies and gentlemen, Ian Anderson.